News this week with conference realignment that the SEC would be interested in Florida State, but one of their biggest rivals might get left behind. We brought in Jim Williams, who is a columnist for Forbes, also a media consultant, and very, very well plugged in with everything going on with conference realignment. Jim, thank you for joining me. How you doing, man?
Hey, it's always good to be with you, TJ, and also, represent the Noles. You gotta love the
Absolutely.
Noles. So,
We'll talk about him in a minute. I know you're a big Coach Bowden fan,
mhm,
so we'll certainly reminisce a little bit about Coach.
fine.
But let's jump right into it.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about this. Florida State attractive to the SEC. Miami maybe not so much, according to the sources that you've chatted with and have talked with. In fact, your tweet kind of outlined that. Can you expound there a little bit more? Is that like a cultural thing? What is that a money thing? What's the situation there?
I think there's a couple of keys to that. If you look at the Southeastern Conference, they have stayed true to what, in essence, is their footprint, right? They like they like the college town atmosphere. They're not into the big city stuff, right? Georgia Tech, doesn't move the needle for them, even though Atlanta is a huge market for them. So they like the idea of what FSU and Clemson bring, right? They bring a very much of uh, a vibe that is very SEC. The concept of going to South Beach doesn't necessarily excite them. Now, does that mean that they wouldn't take, you know, um, Miami? No, but what it does is think about it. There's no way the Southeastern Conference wants three Florida teams together. It just makes no sense. Okay, so if you have to pick one of the two, the SEC feels more comfortable with an FSU. Okay, so that's the theory of the case. They also feel, and whether it's true or not, is that Miami would much rather be in the Big Ten than they would the SEC. So why expend a great deal of time, trying to, and all this, of course, is subject to whatever happens with the ACC.
Sure.
None of this happens if the ACC doesn't. And there's reason to believe the ACC should stay together. So we can get to that at a later date. But the theory of the case with people I've spoken to with the SEC is, if we're going to add anybody, it's going to have to be within our footprint. We don't want to go, across country. We're not trying to do what the Big Ten did by adding teams in New York and Washington and now Los Angeles and perhaps, beyond there. So no. The other thing that the SEC does, it has the luxury of time and on its side, right? I mean, it's a situation where they don't have to. They can wait till the next contract to add people, or they don't even have to. They're very comfortable where they are. So I guess the situation here is when and if FSU and Clemson, FSU or Clemson or whatever, come about, I think they would take the opportunity to sit down and work that deal out. But until that happens, there really isn't any reason to think that they're in a rush to do anything.
Yeah.
They're simply waiting for the proper time. And right now, I don't feel that they feel any urge to do it. And just because whatever happens with the Big Ten, do they have to match them? If the Big Ten chooses to go west or in that situation, I don't think it is. I think right now they're comfortable, and things can change. We don't know what FSU's situation is going to be right now, or when and if they can get out of the ACC, if that's what they want to do. We don't even know if that's what's going on.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But that's what I can tell you. based on that. It's not that, FSU just seems to be a better fit for them, and they believe, meaning, and again, the people I talk to, there's many other people in the conference, but the people I speak to in the conference thinks that Miami is really a better fit for the Big Ten, and FSU would be a better fit for them.
Do you, and I'm not trying to get you to say anything bad about Miami here, but I do think fans would wonder this and want to know, do you think Florida State's more recent success plays into that at all? And Miami's obviously been kind of irrelevant for the last 2 decades or so. Do you think that plays into it much, or is it truly just a regional thing?
I don't think that's it. I just think that they, excuse me, they like the concept of, Florida State plays on, in Tallahassee, on at Doak Campbell Stadium, on campus. It's, it fits with their vibe. It just
That's what they
fits
do,
the
yeah.
SEC do. If you go, look, you've been on to SEC, venues to watch football games. It's not much different than going to an FSU game in Tallahassee.
Sure.
It's a whole different vibe to go to a game in Miami. And
Yeah.
look, I love Miami. I love the University of Miami. I've been lucky enough to do games down there and be with Coach Johnson and Schnellenberger and those guys. So I have no shade on Miami. I think Miami is a very good fit for the Big Ten. And if I were Miami, and I've made this clear. People I've talked to in the Big Ten like the idea of Miami. So I don't think it's. I just don't think it's anybody disrespecting Miami in the SEC. It's just a matter of fit. And for them, I think they feel FSU is a better fit for
Yeah.
them than Miami is. And
The
again,
fan-
they're not going to do 3 schools in the state of Florida.
the fans of the channel wanted you to throw shade, but I appreciate your honesty on the answer. So, all right, we'll jump right back in with Jim, but I want to give some love to our friends over at Gramco. If you haven't tried them just yet, you need to get on that train. Make sure that you go get some gummies. You can get a sample pack for I think $4 or $5 once you use the code. Go check them out, thegramco.com. Use TJ25 for 25% off at checkout. Your number one stop for Delta 8 products. Again, if you haven't tried them just yet, make sure that you go check them out today. They are phenomenal people to work with. They are great, and they have great products. They've got some new stuff coming out that I'm excited to tell you about. Go restock on your gummies, your wake and bake coffee, your pre-rolls, your vapes, whatever you're looking for. Let them get you taken care of. Thegramco.com, TJ25 at checkout. I've said this. I think maybe with the exception of Notre Dame, Sankey came out and said, and Notre Dame maybe doesn't fit this model anyway, but Sankey came out and said that his 2 big requirements were going to be that they didn't expand the geographic footprint. Like you just said, they don't want to go out to the other side of the country. And they also want programs that are all in on all sports, but football especially. Am I just being an FSU homer in thinking that there are no 2 teams in the country that we're talking about that fit that better than Florida State and Clemson that are not already in the SEC or already in the Big Ten?
No, you're right. Brand wise, who's there? I mean, you took Oklahoma and Texas off the board, right? So they're off the board. They're in the SEC. And USC is now in the Big Ten. You could argue about the value of Washington and Oregon. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's not happening for the SEC.
Right.
But the only 2 brands in the footprint, or meeting what Greg Sankey, said that you just, talked about. I mean, it's pretty obvious that it's got to be FSU and it's got to be Clemson. I know there's a lot of people talking about North Carolina and Virginia and that sort of thing. I just, again, find the institutions. I just don't think that that moves the needle much for what the SEC is looking for. Yeah. But and again, why would you go to 4 schools? I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense either. So I think if they do, as you say, I think Clemson and Florida State is right in their wheelhouse as to what they are expecting or wanting, frankly.
You you mentioned that. What about this? Could you see a scenario where the well, let me back up just a little bit. Brett McMurphy tweeted out that according to the people that he's talked with, the AAU would not be a requirement for the Big Ten. Obviously, they'd probably prefer that, but it wouldn't be their end all be all. Could you foresee a scenario where the Big Ten tried to go really, really big and pulled in Notre Dame, Clemson, Florida State, and Miami to try and get themselves back? Because I think the idea would be if the SEC pulled in Clemson and Florida State,
Mm-hmm.
they'd probably solidify themselves as maybe just a step ahead of the Big Ten. But what if the Big Ten just went totally
Crazy?
huge to try and get those four brands? Would that is that a realistic scenario for you?
No, but you know, look, I had the pleasure of working in the Big Ten and the SEC and ACC, so I've known all these guys. The Big Ten, like the SEC, the Big Ten has a if they come south, it would be Georgia Tech and Miami, perhaps North Carolina, Miami, that sort of thing. They're being very strategic about what they want. They're not going to get any more money than what they're getting right now, so that's not going to push the needle anymore. So I think that you know uh, I just don't think the Big Ten is a fit for Florida State, Clemson. I'm sorry, what were the other two that you mentioned?
The other two, Notre Dame, Miami.
Oh,
So
Notre Dame.
those are the ones that are
Dame,
the fit,
sure.
right?
Notre Dame, yes, the great white whale. Um, so yeah, I don't see that happening. I think if they got Notre Dame, I would think they'd go either North Carolina or Stanford if that were the case.
Yeah.
Because I don't think there's any reason for them to go any further. But anyway, I think that for FSU and for FSU's fans, I think you would want. I don't think you'd want to be in the Big Ten. I mean, going and playing, games in the Midwest just wouldn't feel comfortable. I think for FSU fans, I think you'd be much more comfortable, playing in Auburn or playing in Alabama or playing, these teams that your fans. I think that was a huge mistake that when the ACC went, when Greg Swafford was there and they went after the Big East. They got teams like Boston College and Syracuse and Pitt,
Yeah.
those universities, all fine schools, right? Maryland was in there for a while. All fine schools. Problem is they had no relation with North Carolina, and with Georgia,
Yeah.
and with that. So actually, the funny thing was that Pitt and FSU played each other, a couple of times, and so they knew each other.
Yeah.
But they when you start getting
It never
away,
felt like it fit.
yeah, when you start getting away from the region, the regionality, if that's even a word, of college sports, that's when you start getting away from, your fans starting to care again.
Yeah.
How many people do you think would show up at Doak Campbell to watch you guys play, the FSU Rutgers game,
Right. Illinois or
or Illinois or Maryland or
Minnesota or whatever. Yeah. No,
Minnesota?
you're spot on there. And that would be, and it's not only the 6 football games,
Right,
right? It's everything else. It's the
right.
travel cost. And I don't know, I don't want to pretend to be an expert here. And, I know people didn't necessarily tune in for this. It's the travel cost of
Mhm,
sending men's and women's tennis and
mhm.
track and this, that, and the other up to Illinois and Rutgers and all those places you're mentioning, right? Like doing that as opposed to being regional with your non-revenue, your sports that are already losing you money.
Well, you need to have the Olympic sports not have to travel a lot.
Right.
I mean that's crucial.
And so that'd
And
be a huge burden, I feel like.
it would be a massive burden. And that number one, and number two, what kind of audience are you going to get, right?
Right.
Um, FSU Women's softball. Okay, tremendous ratings they got. Okay, I don't think FSU's women's softball will want to go and play Michigan in the middle of in the middle of March when
Right.
it's not exactly the best place to be. Um, and vice versa. I don't think I'm not really sure that there would be many like Penn State coming to FSU to play a baseball game. But I think if you look at it, how would a Vandy FSU baseball game, play over at Hauser
Oh
Stadium?
man.
I
Yeah.
mean, that
The
would
SEC stuff would be huge for those sports.
yeah. So it's again, and the other thing too is then you're recruiting in the same area that you normally recruit, and
Right.
you've got that going for you. And I can't tell you the future. We're really at a nexus at this point in time in college sports. We're so close to the haves and the have-nots being a huge gap. And so it really does. If you're going to keep those, the problem would be that if you're losing money, right, you have to cut sports. And there'll be
Yeah.
some universities would have to cut some of these sports, and that would be terrible for teams that, like a tennis team or um, perhaps field hockey or a number of different sports. But hopefully, and that's again where the regionality of it comes in. You want to play the teams that you guys, when I say you guys, it's all of us that we know, right? You want to beat Alabama, you want to beat Auburn, you want to beat
Right.
Florida, you want to beat the teams that that, and you want to be able to drive over and watch a game. You want to be able to see games when you're not playing on campus.
Yeah.
How many, we all love the road trip. Well, if the road trip is from here to Los Angeles, it's a hell of a road trip.
Yeah, that's a flight for sure,
That's a
and probably
flight.
not happening.
That's a flight, and then a 2 hour, from LAX to get
Right.
to Westwood, which is
Yeah.
about 10 miles. So, at the end of the day, I think if everything were to fall into place, Florida State to the SEC would be a lovely move. I think it would be a great move for everybody. I think the fans will love it, and I think that now the Gators would then become a regular season game, but I don't think that makes any difference.
Yeah. In conference. Yeah.
Yeah.
What I want to ask you this on ACC, and then ask
Mhm.
you maybe something on Coach Bowden, and then we'll wrap up. But with the news coming down that they would do some unequal revenue sharing, kind of based on merit, right? Well,
Sure.
merit maybe is not a great word, but on
It's a good
on
word. It
on
works.
it's not a good word if you ask Michael Alford, because he'd say merit would include the media stuff too. But uh, based on results, based on how some things happen there, do you think that opens the door for them to eventually do unequal revenue sharing for the media side of things, or do you think they'll ever go that far?
They may have to, and I think that they'd be willing. I'm a little concerned as to why they're not becoming why they don't sit down with ESPN and talk extensively you know about adding some teams. I think that might be some things that they could talk about too. I mean, I think that's one of the things that the Big 12 is aggressively pursuing, some teams. But at the end of the day, I mean, not bothers me, but concerns me is it, and it's always on Twitter. So I dismiss it from being totally reality because of Twitter. And I'm as big a pain in the neck on Twitter as anybody else. But the thing is that it's they're literally talking about the demise of the ACC and who's going to get who, as if it's like a divorce. And okay, I'm getting these two schools, and you're getting those two schools, and they've all kicked out the ACC and dismissed them as being, oh well, it's they're all going in separate directions. When
Right.
in fact, you know you could argue that the ACC has a very strong chance of being, of staying together and getting a better deal when the next deal comes. But that's in 36, so that's a long time to wait. But I think that once the SEC deal and the ACC deal is gone, we'll have a better feel for what the future of college football and college sports in general is going to look like.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of lawsuits that are out there that one or two of them pops, and it's going to change the way we view college sports, from football to, like I said, to field hockey.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Let me ask you this. I know you were a big Coach Bowden guy. We could sit here and we probably should just do a show on Coach Bowden
Yeah.
here soon. Um, I know you're very familiar with the Florida State program. We're very familiar with Coach Bowden specifically. I
Mhm.
want to transition that into just what are your overall thoughts and what's your perception of where Mike Norvell has this thing headed right now?
Right now, I think Coach Norvell's doing a fine job. I think that um, he he's got the team back on track, and there. I do believe that for him and for the university, the next, I would say, 3-4 years are going to be crucial. Um, FSU has to be relevant. It's not only good for the university; it's good for college football. I mean, it's good to have your brand name teams be brand name teams, and I think that what we saw last year with FSU and how they played, if they can keep the momentum moving in that direction, I think that's fantastic. I think if we're talking about the SEC and other possibilities, and relevancy at all, you have to win. I went to University of South Florida, and they're building a stadium now, which is fantastic. It's wonderful, but until they start winning, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And for FSU, FSU needs to uh, get back to where it was in the Bowden days, when Clemson was just another team on the schedule.
Yeah.
We're beating everybody. It doesn't matter what if if Dabo's bringing his team here, or we're going to Death Valley. We're not going. We're not coming home a loser. So I think it's critical for FSU to continue this upward trend, and I think that as long as Coach Norvell can keep things on track, I think they'll be in good shape.
I think there's a false narrative out there that we'll wrap it up with one more SEC. I lied. There's a false narrative out there that Florida State would not compete in the SEC, and I can say the contrary to that until I'm blue in the face. But I think people just say, "Well, you're a Florida State fan, so of course you think you can." Based on what Florida State's done, and kind of always that less is more, or like they've always done more with less.
Mhm.
Do you have any questions that Florida State would be a competitive team and kind of compete for it all in the SEC?
I think that I don't know that they. Um, the way I mean, here's how I'll do it. I'm stuttering and stammering like a fool, but the thing is this: I think that FSU could solidly compete, each year in the Eastern Division, just where Florida is, and the rest of the guys over there, without any problem. I think that's it. I think that the problem becomes, what happens with Alabama and the others. I mean,
Sure.
everybody there's Alabama, Georgia, and then the rest. Okay,
Right.
and I can't tell you how much I enjoy watching Jimbo Fisher lose. It's a joy. But I do think that FSU could be competitive, and with the kind of traction that winning gives you, right? If they can continue to win, well, then they can move up and be a contender with the big guys of the Georgias and the Alabamas. But after Georgia, Alabama, you know, and I'm very interested in seeing what Kelly does at LSU. Um, I think after those three or two, and then 1A, I'm interested in seeing where things are going to go
Yeah.
because certainly FSU can compete with the teams that are in that level just below those two guys.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think that there are professional teams that may not be able to compete with Alabama and Georgia at this point. But you have to look at the reality of it. But no, I mean, if you look at what FSU is capable of doing and capable of bringing to the table, sure, they can compete with the SEC in the SEC, and I think that's what makes them attractive to the SEC. I mean, the SEC doesn't want teams that are going to lose. That brings you nothing.
Yeah. That's kind of where I see I kind of have the same thoughts, right? And that would probably be the same for all of college football coming to the SEC. Nobody's going to come in. I don't expect Texas and Oklahoma to come in and compete with Georgia and Alabama, at least in the very near future. But I think Florida State, Clemson, Texas, Oklahoma, I think those teams could compete with kind of that next level, the LSU's, the Florida when they're rolling, the Tennessees when they're rolling, the A&Ms when they're rolling. There's certainly a tier system of Alabama, Georgia, few other schools, 3 or 4 in there, and then everyone else. So,
Right. Well,
Jim,
so
I appreciate.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say it was like the Big Ten. I mean,
Yeah,
if I mean USC comes to the Big Ten, I don't think that you know bothers Ohio State and Michigan. It's like fine, bring them on. Who cares? Um,
but everybody else.
yeah, but it's really, really you had to bring Lincoln Riley and these guys. So great, thanks.
Yeah,
Really appreciate it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Jim, I appreciate you for jumping on and joining us. Where can people follow you? Where can they find your work? Give yourself a little shout out here.
Well, the best place is to check it out on, I link all of my stuff to Twitter. So if you follow me on Twitter, then you'll get all of the stories. And one coming up this weekend on U.S. Open with Dan Hicks and the gang at NBC. We talk about the Los Angeles Country Club and the U.S. Open and who might be the one to win that one. So we'll see that, and that's usually we focus on television and entertainment. So we'll be there, and of course we try to keep track of what's going on and in the media deals, and who knows what that's going to be like, but we'll see. But it's always a pleasure to be with you, TJ.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you for joining us.